The gellar field hummed faintly around the ship Vigilant Mercy, a low vibration that trembled through the deck plates like the pulse of a sleeping beast. Beyond it stretched the immaterial sea, the warp, roiling colors of hatred and madness. Screams turned to storms, the half-light of dead gods, but for now it was silent. Too silent. Captain Sarah Vaughan stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the shifting void outside the forward observation dome. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and sharp against the crimson and indigo haze. Even after decades of voidfaring, she had never seen the warp so still. No eddies of emotion, no psychic static gnawing at her temples, no whispers from beyond the veil. It was empty. The navigator, a shrouded figure slumped in his containment throne, twitched beneath layers of silk and gold filigree. The third eye on his forehead fluttered, then closed. "The currents have ceased," he murmured in a strained, hollow voice. "The Imperium sleeps." A silence spread across the bridge. The astropaths bowed their heads, hands trembling. Even the servitors paused mid-task, their augmetic limbs jerking uncertainly before continuing. The ship was wrapped in something unseen, a stillness that pressed against the hull like invisible ice. Vaughan's second officer, Lieutenant Harrix, broke the quiet. "Ma'am, sensors show no warp flux at all. No storms, no entities, we're dead still." "That's impossible," Vaughan said. Her tone was calm, but her pulse was. "We're in the Great Rift's fringe. The warp never sleeps here." The navigator stirred again, his voice distant. "This silence, it is not peace. It is a mouth waiting to open." Those words clung to the air like frost. 3 hours later, the Vigilant Mercy was still adrift. No gellar field interference. No psychic echoes. No demons scratching at the veil. The void outside remained motionless, a canvas of frozen color, lightless, soundless. It felt wrong in every way. Vaughan walked through the corridors, the sound of her boots echoing too loudly. Even the engines seemed subdued, their usual thrum replaced by a dull heartbeat. Crew members avoided eye contact. Conversations were whispered, as if the very air was listening. In the ship's chapel, the confessor led a prayer for safe passage, but his words felt swallowed. His voice didn't carry even within the sanctum. The candles burned low, their flames struggling against an unseen weight. "Captain," came the voxcom from the bridge, "you'd better see this." She arrived to find Harrix pale, eyes locked on the hololithic map. The ship's warp projection, once a tangle of luminous lines and psychic currents, now displayed a vast gray field, a blank nothingness, a silence rendered visible. "We can't find the Astronomicon," Harrix whispered. "Even with the gellar field holding, it's gone. There's no light from Terra." The navigator's head lifted weakly. "No, that cannot be. The Emperor's light cannot die." "Then where is it?" Harrix's voice cracked. "Because right now, sir, there's nothing, not even residual psychic echoes." Vaughan leaned closer to the display. The void around them seemed to pulse faintly, rhythmically. "It's not gone," she said softly. "It's being smothered." Hours bled into a day. Crewmen began reporting strange sensations, not pain, not madness, just absence. No dreams in sleep, no emotion in thought. Laughter felt hollow, tears wouldn't fall. The ship's vox channels began cutting out at random, though there was no interference. The confessor approached Vaughan privately. "Captain, there is something stalking the silence." She frowned. "Explain." He held out his rosarius, its faint light flickering. "When I pray, I feel nothing. Not rejection, not presence. Only emptiness. As if the warp has forgotten us. As if something vast and ancient has inhaled and we are waiting for the exhale." The navigator convulsed again, his third eye opening wide. His voice echoed through the chamber with unnatural resonance. "The tides are watching. They are listening." The bridge lights flickered. Every console flashed with static for 3 seconds, then returned to normal. But when the static cleared, one word appeared across the main hololith in crude, shifting high Gothic. "Listen." Vorn's heart froze. Who wrote that? No one, ma'am, said Harrick's voice shaking. It appeared in every system. Vox, Auspex, Astropathic Relay, even the Vox spools. Purge it. We did, it came back. Then the lights died completely. The only illumination came from the stars outside, or what passed for stars in the warp, faint, crystalline motes suspended like the fragments of shattered glass. The silence grew heavier, pressing against eardrums, against thought itself. Crew members began to panic quietly. Some started humming just to hear something. Others screamed at the walls, only to hear their voices fade into nothingness. The navigator spoke again, voice trembling. We are not adrift, we are being held. Vorn turned sharply. By what? He shook his head slowly. Not a creature, not a storm, something older, a silence that predates all sound, a wound in the warp itself. The confessor's voice rose. Captain, I counsel withdrawal. Engage the emergency translation protocols. We must return to real space. Without the astronomicon, we'll tear ourselves apart. Better that than to remain here. But Vorn hesitated. Her instincts screamed that this silence wasn't passive. It was sentient, waiting. To flee now might be exactly what it wanted. Then came the whisper. It was faint at first, not a sound but an intrusion of thought. A voice that wasn't heard so much as felt. It moved through every mind aboard the Vigilant Mercy like a cold breeze across an open grave. You wanted peace, it said. You begged for quiet. Crewmen dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. The confessor cried out, reciting prayers in desperation, but the words fell dead. No echo, no defiance. Now you will learn what peace truly is. Every heart on board skipped once, perfectly synchronized, as if the silence itself had clenched around them. Then nothing. No screams, no sound, not even the hum of the ship. The entire Vigilant Mercy became utterly, completely silent. Hours later, or perhaps centuries, time lost meaning. Vorn awoke on the bridge floor. Her ears rang with the faintest echo of something human. Breathing. She wasn't alone. Harrex lay nearby, motionless but alive. The navigator was gone from his throne, his binding snapped open. The air felt wrong, thin, dry, and void of energy. She moved to the observation dome, heart pounding. The warp outside was no longer a frozen sea. It was black, utterly black. The colors were gone, replaced by an infinite void stretching in every direction. And then she saw them. Shapes, human shapes drifting in the dark beyond the Gellar field. They looked like ghosts at first, but their faces were clear. Crew members, dozens of them, hundreds, silent, motionless, eyes wide open. Their mouths were moving, but no sound came. Vorn stumbled back, whispering a prayer. The Vox crackled once more, not sound, but a vibration that buzzed in the skull. Do you hear it now? The silence pulsed again, and in that instant Vorn realized it was not absence at all. It was alive. The darkness around the ship began to shift, slow, graceful, like a curtain being drawn. And behind that curtain, something vast stirred, unseen but felt in the marrow. The silence was ending, but what came next would make every storm in the warp seem merciful. The first sound to return was not a voice, nor an alarm, nor the hum of the engines. It was a heartbeat, a single heavy pulse that reverberated through the Vigilant Mercy like a blow to the hull. Then another, and another. The ship began to breathe again, but not as a machine, as something living. Every bulkhead, every pipe, every deck plate thudded in perfect rhythm. Captain Sarah Vorn stood at the center of the bridge, one hand pressed against the nearest console. She could feel it, the metal vibrating under her palm, slow and deliberate. The silence had become a pulse, a rhythm too organic to be mechanical, too ordered to be natural. The faint light from the hololith flickered back on, displaying a warped image of the ship's systems. Lines of code scrolled across the main display in shifting high Gothic symbols that no one recognized. The words seemed to move like tendons, twitching and tightening across the screen. Lieutenant Harris groaned, pulling himself upright from the deck. His face was pale, eyes hollow, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, I think the ship is breathing." The confessor crossed himself, whispering a prayer. "This vessel is consecrated in the name of the Emperor. Whatever corruption has touched it must be purged." "No," Vorn said quietly. "This isn't corruption, it's mimicry." The bridge crew exchanged glances. "The silence, it's learning," she continued. "It's trying to understand what sound is." Harrix's breath quickened. "You think it's imitating us?" Before Vorn could answer, a new sound filled the air, the softest whisper of metal stretching. The bridge walls shifted almost imperceptibly, as though the ship itself were flexing. Lights stuttered. Then came the groan of the hull, long, deep, painful. It wasn't just the warp outside moving now. The vigilant Mercy was changing shape. In the lower decks, the silence began to break differently. The crew heard footsteps where none should be, the sound of pacing in empty corridors, mechanical shrieks that came from sealed maintenance shafts. Crewmen who tried to follow the noises reported finding walls that weren't there before, corridors that led back on themselves, and doors that opened into places that should have been solid steel. The engine seer prime, Magos Lurek, stood in the engine room surrounded by chanting servitors. The holy plasma coils were steady, but the readings were wrong, impossibly wrong. The energy output wasn't being drained or disrupted. It was absorbed. The ship was feeding the silence. He activated a servoskull, sending it drifting into the plasma conduit to take readings. It vanished halfway through. The auspex showed no damage, it simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no interference. One moment there, the next gone. He turned to his adepts. "The vessel has ceased to obey the Mechanicum's will," he said. His tone was flat, analytical. "Something has overlaid its machine spirit, a foreign consciousness, a reflection." The adepts turned to him, their mechadendrites twitching in agitation. "Purge protocols?" one asked. "Negative," Lurek replied. "It is no demon. It does not hunger or rage, it listens." Then all across the ship, the Vox channels came alive at once. Not with words, with breathing. Hundreds of overlapping breaths, all in perfect sync, all following that same slow, heavy rhythm. Each one sounded like it came from inside the listener's own helmets, echoing behind their eyes. The effect was unbearable. Crewmen tore off their comlinks, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't in the speakers anymore. It was in their minds. Vorn felt it too. Her chest rose and fell in time with the rhythm, no matter how hard she tried to resist. It was as though her own body was being forced to match the tempo of something vast. "Navigator," she said sharply, "report your position." Silence. His throne was empty. The bindings that once restrained his form had been cut, not broken, but sliced, as if with surgical precision. The only thing left behind was a faint smear of golden ichor across the headrest. Harrix swallowed hard. Where did he go? The confessor closed his eyes. He was taken by the silence itself, or worse, he became part of it. The lights flickered again. The word "listen" returned to every console, pulsing in time with the heartbeat of the ship. Then, for the first time, another word appeared beneath it. "Speak." The confessor raised his rosarius. "Captain, this is blasphemy. Whatever intelligence is at work here is mocking the divine order. It demands that we speak to it." Vorn frowned. "Then we give it nothing, mute all Vox channels, lock down all relays." But before anyone could obey, the entire ship groaned once more. The air thickened, pressing inward as though the atmosphere itself wanted to crush them. The bridge windows darkened until only the faintest silhouette of the warp remained beyond, and in that silhouette, faint lines began to form. Faces, thousands of faces, blurred and stretched, pressed against the veil of the Gellar field. Crewmen, astropaths, even servitors, all moving their mouths silently. Harex whispered, "They're trying to speak." And then sound. It began as a murmur, distant and uneven, but it grew, building like an approaching tide. The voices outside were speaking now, not screaming, not pleading, whispering. Vorn leaned closer to the glass. "What are they saying?" The confessor strained to listen, his expression draining of all color. "They're repeating one phrase." He turned, eyes wide with terror. "Let us in." The sound built until the hull itself vibrated with it, every word in perfect rhythm, in perfect unison. "Let us in, let us in," over and over. Vorn's hand shot out. "Raise the Geller field output by 20%. Lurek's voice came through the Vox. "Impossible. The conduits are resisting modulation. It no longer listens to command." "Then shut it down." There was a pause, then quietly, "Captain, it already has." The hum vanished. The barrier between the vigilant mercy and the warp collapsed with a whisper, not a scream. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then reality folded. Light erupted through every corridor, not illumination, but exposure. The walls seemed to dissolve, revealing layers of the ship that shouldn't exist. Rooms behind rooms, shadows within shadows. Crewmen stared into places that were never built, where staircases climbed into impossible angles and hallways led straight into blackness. Vorn gritted her teeth as her vision split. For a moment, she saw herself standing in the same place, a dozen versions of her, all overlapping, each turning their head in a different direction. "Harex," she shouted, "status report." His reply came in multiple voices, overlapping and echoing. "Ma'am, we've slipped. We're not in the warp, we're beneath it." "Define beneath." He hesitated. "It's like the silence was a floor and we fell through it." All over the ship, the crew began to vanish. Not in light or fire, but in quiet. A man would take a breath, step forward, and simply not make a sound again. His body would remain for a second, blurred at the edges, before fading into translucence and then disappearing entirely. Each disappearance left behind a faint echo, a wordless vibration in the air, like the ghost of their last heartbeat. Lurek's adepts were the first to understand. "It's not killing them," one whispered. "It's archiving them." Vorn didn't want to believe it, but she could feel it too. The silence wasn't devouring, it was collecting, recording, studying. For the first time, she realized this might not be an attack at all. It was contact. The silence was speaking back. Hours or seconds later, she found herself in the chapel. The candles were out, yet she could see clearly. The icons of the Emperor had melted into abstract shapes, their features erased. The confessor knelt before the altar, eyes closed, whispering something over and over. Vorn approached quietly. "Father." He didn't answer. She placed a hand on his shoulder. He turned. His face was gone, not destroyed, erased. His skin was smooth where his eyes and mouth should have been. Yet somehow she heard his voice inside her head. "Do you see? It listens only to silence." She stumbled back, horrified, as he rose to his feet, head tilting unnaturally. The warp was never chaos, the thought whispered. The warp was always listening. Then the chapel's walls began to hum. Low, deep, harmonic. The same rhythm that had pulsed through the ship now echoed through her bones. The vigilant mercy was no longer a vessel. It was a resonator. And the silence, the thing behind it, was tuning it. Vorn clutched her head, falling to her knees. The noise wasn't sound anymore. It was meaning. A flood of memory, of emotion, of comprehension poured into her mind, too vast to contain. She saw flashes, the birth of the warp itself, before thought, before emotion. A perfect stillness, untouched by life or death. Then came the first spark of mortal consciousness, and with it noise. The warp screamed for the first time, and it has screamed ever since. But beneath it all, the original stillness had remained, watching, waiting. And now, after millennia of chaos, it had heard something new: fear. The silence wasn't just an absence, it was response, the warp's answer to its own madness. The pulse stopped. The bridge lights flickered back on. The consoles returned to normal. For a moment it looked as though nothing had happened. Crew reports came through the Vox again, faint but there. Systems online. Gellar field stabilized. Had it all been a hallucination? Then Harrix's voice broke through, urgent. "Captain, I've found something in the logs. You need to see this." On the hololith, a playback began, a recording from moments ago. The bridge exactly as they were now. But in the recording, Vorn wasn't standing still. She was looking straight at the camera. Her eyes were black. Her mouth moved silently. Harrix whispered, "She's saying something." Vorn leaned in. Enhance audio. Static, then faintly a voice emerged. "Can you hear it now?" The silence answered, a deep, slow heartbeat, and the recording ended. Vorn's own heartbeat skipped. The walls of the bridge shuddered once. And then, from somewhere deep within the hull, came the faintest echo of a human voice. Not a scream, a whisper. "We let it in." The vigilant Mercy drifted through the black sea of the silent warp like a carcass suspended in glass. The void beyond its hull was still, frozen, yet everything inside the ship throbbed with life, or what passed for it. The silence had become something tangible, a pressure felt in the lungs and behind the eyes. Captain Sarah Vorn hadn't slept since the heartbeat began. The sound pulsed faintly through the walls, steady, patient, inescapable. She tried isolating the frequency, thinking it might be a mechanical anomaly or psychic interference. It was. Every auspex showed the same impossible reading. The pulse didn't come from the ship. It was the ship. And now the voices had started. They whispered from the ventilation shafts, the crawl spaces, the very metal of the decks, always faint, always just out of comprehension. Not random, rhythmic, patterned, as though reciting verses from an unseen text. The crew had begun to go mad trying to decode them. Lieutenant Harrix found her in the observation dome, staring at the featureless void beyond the glass. His voice was hoarse, his face gaunt. "They're getting louder." "I know," she said without turning. "We lost 2 more crewmen from Deck 12. They said they heard something calling from behind the hull. They went to investigate. The cameras caught them walking into the maintenance shafts. They never came out." "Did you send a retrieval team?" "They refused." Vorn's eyes flicked toward him. "Refused." Harrix's expression faltered. "They said the walls were breathing, that when they got close to the bulkhead, they could hear something on the other side tapping, like fingers on glass." The captain turned back to the window. The warp remained utterly black, the same oppressive void that had replaced the roiling madness of colors. "We're sitting in the eye of something," she said softly, "something that doesn't want us to leave." Below decks, Magos Lurek worked in silence, surrounded by the hum of cooling systems and the low chant of his remaining servitors. Half his workforce had vanished into the dark. The ship's cogitators were corrupted beyond repair, their data streams rewritten into incomprehensible patterns that pulsed like a living brainwave. Lurek had begun to map the pulse. It wasn't random. It followed a mathematical rhythm, recursive, fractal, folding in on itself endlessly, a pattern that built upon silence, not sound. He recognized it as something ancient, pre-human, perhaps even pre-existence. The warp had always been defined by noise, the psychic roars of emotion and thought. But this was its shadow. He whispered into his Vox recorder, "If noise is the language of life, then silence must be the language of death. Yet this silence creates, it molds, it learns. I suspect we are witnessing the first utterance of a new order, a god born of nothingness." The recording stopped. The air around him shivered. One of the servitors turned its head sharply. Its voice module crackled, emitting static that resolved into words. "You hear us now." Lurek froze. The servitor's eyes glowed faintly red, its face twitched. You made us scream for millennia, now we will show you quiet. The Magos raised his mechadendrites, activating his defense protocols, but before he could strike, the servitor's head imploded silently, no explosion, no fire. Just an inward collapse as though space itself had pinched closed around it. The others followed, one by one, their bodies folding neatly into nothingness. Lurek stood alone in the engine hall, the pulse of the ship vibrating through his augmetics. He felt it crawling through the circuits in his spine. The silence was no longer just outside, it had entered the machine. He turned toward the Vox. "Captain Vorn," he said, voice strained, "we are being rewritten." The bridge was chaos when Vorn arrived. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and fear. The hololith showed static images flickering in and out, glimpses of corridors where there should have been bulkheads, shadowy outlines moving through sealed compartments. Herix was shouting orders to the comms officers. "Lock it down, all channels to manual control." "They're already locked," one of them replied. "But the system's still transmitting. It's broadcasting on frequencies that don't exist." Vorn stepped forward. "Where is it transmitting to?" The officer looked up, face pale. "Everywhere." The ship's Vox suddenly came alive again, not with the heavy breathing of before, but with a single, unified voice. Calm, cold, feminine. "We were never outside." Every head turned. The voice echoed through the deck, gentle yet absolute. "You think the silence came to you. You think it found your vessel lost among the tides, but you misunderstand. You entered us. You fell beneath the noise into what came before it. We did not move toward you. You sank into us." The confessor crossed himself. "It speaks through the machine spirit," he whispered. The voice continued, unhurried. "You cling to your light, to your screams, to your dying emperor. You call the warp chaos, but it was never chaos. It was the noise of your kind, all your thoughts, all your pain. And now, at last, that noise is quieting." Vorn stepped toward the console. "Identify yourself." A pause, then. "We are what remains when all sound ends. We are the stillness that comes for everything." "Why us?" she demanded. "Because you heard us first." The Vox died. The bridge fell into utter stillness. For a long moment no one dared speak. Then slowly the confessor approached her, voice trembling. "Captain, we must purge this ship, burn it clean. The Emperor's light must not allow such a thing to exist." Vorn turned toward him. "You think this is something that can be burned?" She gestured toward the dark window. "Look outside, Father. That silence isn't a place. It's reality's underside, the universe beneath the universe." He shook his head. "That is heresy." "Maybe," she said, "but it's true." Hours later in the Medici Bay, a group of survivors huddled around a malfunctioning lumen strip, its dim light flickering. One of them, a young astropath named Kellen, stared into the darkness of the corridor. His hollow eyes were weeping blood. "They're in the walls," he whispered. "They're speaking through the steel." A Medici knelt beside him. "You're delirious, rest." But Kellen shook his head violently. "No, no, you don't understand. The silence isn't silence anymore. It's full of voices. Millions of them, all whispering at once. They're not trying to kill us, they're trying to join us." He leaned close, eyes wide and unfocused. "They said there's no pain there, no time, only quiet." Then he smiled, a slow, unnatural expression that didn't reach his eyes. "And once you listen long enough, you start to understand it." His chest convulsed. His spine arched. His mouth opened in a silent scream. When the Medici reached for him, his body dissolved, breaking apart into faint dust, scattering like smoke into the air. The others fled. Back on the bridge, Herix found something in the ship's data archives, a signal embedded within the silence itself. It wasn't random interference. It was a structure, a message layered beneath every sound wave. He decoded the pattern and displayed it on the hololith. It wasn't text, it was a shape, a spiral endlessly folding inward, made of thousands of overlapping human silhouettes. Vorn's eyes narrowed. What is that? Harrix's voice quavered. I think it's us, the crew, every soul that vanished. It's building something. Building what? He hesitated, a voice. The confessor spoke again, voice filled with dread. Captain, this is no natural phenomenon. It's a harvest. It consumes our sound, our breath, our being, and for what? To speak through us. Vorn turned to him. Maybe that's the only way it can communicate. The priest's expression hardened. And what will it say, Captain, when it finally learns to speak properly? She didn't answer. Later in her private quarters, Vorn sat alone. The pulse of the ship matched her heartbeat now. She could feel it through the chair, through her skin. The silence no longer frightened her. It felt almost comforting. She thought of the voice's words, "You entered us." Was that true? Had they fallen not through the warp but beneath it, into some substratum of existence that predated thought itself? If so, then no signal, no prayer, no emperor could reach them here. Then the mirror across from her rippled. Her reflection blinked. Vorn froze, she hadn't blinked. The reflection tilted its head. Its mouth moved, forming silent words, then sound faint but clear. Can you hear it now? Vorn's reflection smiled, not cruelly, almost sadly. Then it raised its hand and pressed its palm against the glass. The glass didn't crack, it yielded like water. A wave of cold rushed into the room. Vorn's breath fogged. The pulse in the walls grew louder. She stepped back, heart pounding. Bridge, this is the captain. Something is happening in my quarters. The comm crackled. Harrix's voice came through, panicked. Ma'am, the hull, something is moving underneath us. She turned and ran. When she reached the observation dome, the crew were already gathered, staring out into the black. For the first time since the silence began, there was movement outside. The void rippled, faint, slow undulations, like breath beneath fabric. Then shapes began to emerge. Enormous, translucent forms rising from the dark, each one made of flickering light and shadow. Human silhouettes on a colossal scale, stretching for kilometers. Their faces were blank, featureless, yet somehow familiar. Harrix whispered, "Those are us." Each figure mirrored the movements of the crew aboard the Vigilant Mercy. When they raised their hands, the shapes outside raised theirs. When they stepped forward, the silhouettes glided closer to the hull. Vorn's blood ran cold. They're learning faster. The confessor fell to his knees, praying desperately. The Emperor protect us. The Emperor protect us. But even his prayers began to warp. The words bent mid-sentence, twisting into echoes of themselves. The silence protects us. The silence protects us. His voice broke, his faith devoured by the echo. Outside, the shapes leaned closer. Their mouths began to move. And for the first time since the silence fell, the Vigilant Mercy heard true sound. It wasn't words. It was a scream, vast, ancient, unending. A scream that had waited 10,000 years to be born. The glass cracked. The scream became a single word. Hello. The hull split open. Light flooded the bridge. And then there was nothing but silence again. There are no stars in the warp. Only the illusion of them. Shards of false light flicker through its depths, mockeries of the Imperium's constellations, broken remnants of ships, souls and prayers that never reached their destination. For days or hours, time no longer meant anything. The survivors aboard the Trisagion drifted through this nothingness. No vox chatter, no machine hum, not even the familiar background vibration of the Gellar field could be heard anymore. The silence was total. And yet something was listening. Astropath Virene was the first to hear it, or rather to feel it. A tremor beneath thought, like fingers brushing against the surface of her mind. She had been sitting motionless in the dark, eyes open but unfocused, when her lips began to move in an unbidden whisper. "They're learning our shape," she murmured. "They're rebuilding us from the echoes." Captain Calios stood near the command lectern, his face pale beneath flickering emergency lumens. "Rebuilding. Speak plainly, Psyker." Virene's breathing quickened. When the silence began, it wasn't empty. It was a vacuum that drew in everything. Now something is giving it back, but wrong, twisted. The void around the ship began to hum faint, low, almost below perception. The sound was not mechanical. It was too organic, too curious. And with that sound came vibration through the hull, as though the ship were floating in a living ocean rather than an immaterial dimension. The crew felt it in their bones. Navigator Saren clutched his temples. "The Empyrean is stirring. It's like it's waking from a dream." "Maintain field integrity," Calios ordered, his voice trembling despite himself. "We stay the course until the Astronomicon is found again. There is no deviation." But there was no Astronomicon anymore. Not here. The silence of the warp was a suffocating absence, and any attempt to reach beyond it returned only static, no guidance, no psychic beacon from Terra. Then came the tapping. Soft at first on the outer hull. 1, 2, 3 taps evenly spaced, deliberate, like knuckles against glass. Every head turned toward the sound. "Impact?" asked Ensign Rel. "No," whispered the tech priest. "No debris, no asteroids. The void sensors register nothing." The tapping stopped. And then came a second rhythm from inside the ship. It came from the chapel deck, where hundreds of terrified crew had been praying for deliverance. Calios led a squad of armsmen down the narrow corridors, their boots echoing sharply in the stillness. The air was thick with the smell of incense and machine oil. When they reached the chapel doors, they found them sealed from within. "Override it," Calios commanded. The tech priest interfaced with the locking runes. Sparks hissed, metal groaned. Then the great doors slid open. No one prayed inside anymore. Every figure was kneeling in perfect symmetry, heads bowed, hands clasped, but they weren't breathing. Their eyes were open, pupils wide and empty. A single figure stood among them, the ship's confessor, still clutching a censer in his hand. He turned as they entered, moving with unsettling slowness. "They listened," he said softly. The silence listened back. "What happened here?" Calios demanded. The confessor smiled faintly. "They asked for peace. It gave them quiet." He raised his censer. The smoke that spilled out wasn't incense. It was black and thick and alive. The armsmen fired. Bolter shells roared through the air, shattering icons and splintering wood. The confessor fell, his blood, or what should have been blood, spreading like ink, vanishing into the deck. The bodies of the kneeling crew slumped forward, lifeless. The silence rushed back in, heavier now, oppressive. Virene stumbled into the chapel behind them, clutching her head. "You shouldn't have done that," she gasped. "He was the only thing holding it back." Calios turned on her. "Holding what back?" She pointed to the far wall. At first it seemed like a shadow, the kind cast by a dying lumen. But shadows don't ripple. Shadows don't listen. The wall began to pulse, slowly, rhythmically, like a heart. And from that pulsing dark, faint whispers began to form, not in sound but in thought. Dozens of voices speaking in unison, all identical, all calm. "You entered the silence," they said. "Now the silence enters you." The navigator screamed as blood streamed from his eyes. His third eye flared open wide, blinding, and in that instant everyone saw it. The ship wasn't adrift in the warp. It was inside something. A vast, translucent membrane surrounded them, pulsing, shifting, a colossal shape of lightless flesh that extended into infinity in all directions. They hadn't been traveling through the warp, they'd been swallowed by it. The warp was alive. The bridge erupted in chaos. Crew fled their posts, shouting prayers, some tearing at their own ears to escape the whispered voices. The silence had become a sound now, an unbearable low frequency that made their bones ache. Calios slammed his fist into the control lectern. "We are Imperial servants. You will not take us." But the machine spirits did not answer him. The cogitators had fallen silent. The engines had gone dead. Only the hum remained. And deep in that hum a new tone emerged, higher, sharper, like a scream held beneath water. Virene staggered. "It's learning our language," she whispered. "It's trying to speak." The Vox units across the ship crackled to life, all channels activating simultaneously. Every speaker bled static, until words began to form through the noise. "Do you hear us?" The voices were not many. They were one layered over itself infinitely, a consciousness that had no beginning, no end. Virene collapsed, clutching her skull. "It's not asking," she groaned. "It's reminding." Calios drew his sidearm. "Reminding us of what?" Her eyes rolled back. Of the time before the Emperor walked among men, when silence ruled everything. The bridge lights dimmed. Every lumen flickered once, twice, then died. Absolute darkness. But in that void the crew began to see. Shapes of lightless color, things the human eye was never meant to perceive, twisting around them like ribbons of glass. They weren't hallucinations. They were memories, not theirs but the warp's. They saw ancient battles fought between beings of pure thought, the birth of demons from emotion, the first scream that tore the veil between realms. Then came the image of humanity, billions of flickering lights piercing the void, and how that light made the warp hungry. The silence spoke again. "You gave us voices, now we hunger for yours." The hull began to creak. Crewmen dropped to their knees as invisible pressure crushed the air from their lungs. Calios fired blindly into the dark, each shot echoing uselessly. Then suddenly sound. A single, pure tone rang through the ship like a bell. It was the warp's doing. It came from the heart of the Trisagion, from the engine shrine, where the Gellar field generator still pulsed weakly. The tech priest shouted over the din. "Field integrity surging, it's reawakening." But the silence laughed, not with mockery but with pity. "You cannot separate the soul from its echo," it said. "You have already been heard." Calios looked to Virene, who was barely conscious. "Tell me how to stop it." She met his gaze with hollow eyes. "You can't stop silence, you can only break it." She reached out, blood trailing from her nose and ears, and pressed her hand to the comm panel. "May the Emperor forgive me," she whispered. She screamed a single psychic pulse into the void, a cry of human will. The warp shattered. Every lumen exploded. Every sound returned in one deafening rush, alarms, screams, the roar of engines all at once. And then it was gone. The crew blinked, dazed, as stars reappeared on the view screen. Real stars, the Imperium. They had escaped. But only for a moment. Because as they began to cheer, they heard it again, faint, at the edge of perception. A heartbeat. Slow, constant. And this time, it was coming from inside the ship. The warp was gone, or so they thought. Stars shimmered beyond the viewport, cold, distant, real. The crew of the Trisagion had returned to the Imperium, and yet no one spoke. No one celebrated. The void around them was still too still, too perfect. Space shouldn't be this quiet. Captain Calios stood at the command lectern, his reflection ghosted against the glass. His jaw was locked, his eyes bloodshot. "Confirm position," he ordered, voice hoarse. The navigator didn't respond. "Saren," Calios repeated, "confirm position." Saren was still strapped into his chair, head tilted upward. His breathing was shallow. His third eye, the one no human dared to look at, remained half open, twitching as if it saw something beyond sight. "Navigator Saren," the captain barked, striding closer. When he touched Saren's shoulder, the navigator turned toward him, slowly, too slowly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, something else, a thin trickle of dark fluid, like ink, spilled from his lips. The Medici rushed forward, pulling him free of his harness. "He's not dead," she shouted. "He's—" Saren's body convulsed. His spine arched. The black fluid poured from his mouth and eyes, rising into the air like smoke, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. The crew fell back in horror as those shapes began to speak. "Did you think the silence would forget you?" the voice asked. It was Saren's. It was the same voice that had filled the ship before, the same calm, endless tone that bled through every wall and thought. Callio stumbled back. "Helm control, vent the bridge." The order came too late. The black smoke surged outward, moving like water, splitting into tendrils that slithered through the vents. The air filled with whispers. Crewmen clutched their ears, screaming as the voices slipped into their minds. Words that weren't words, thoughts that unmade thought. Virene, the astropath, lay unconscious near the comm terminal, her pulse weak. The tech priest Magos Vian knelt beside her, chanting binaric prayers to stabilize her soul's resonance. But even he faltered as the Vox units lit up again, broadcasting the same single message on every channel. Silence is never empty. The ship's lumens flickered. The deck groaned. Something enormous brushed against the outer hull. Callio steadied himself against the console. "Engine control, report." No answer, only static. He turned to the tech priest. "Vian, speak to me." The Magos' voice came out broken, filtered through layers of static. "The machine spirits are compromised. Logic patterns are rewriting themselves. The Gellar field believes it's still active." "Believes," Callio's echoed. "Yes, Captain, it believes. It prays to a silence that answers." The sound came again, the heartbeat. Louder now. The entire ship seemed to breathe with it, each pulse vibrating through the walls. It wasn't mechanical, it was alive. And it was inside. Callio's opened a channel to all decks. "All hands, report to command sectors and maintain formation. Any deviation will be punished by summary execution." He needed to sound in control. He needed to sound like a captain. But no one replied. The only answer was the heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. Then faintly beneath it came the sound of footsteps, hundreds of them, moving in perfect unison through the lower decks. The armsmen drew their weapons. "That's impossible," one whispered. "There's no way anyone could be marching in this vacuum." Callio's eyes narrowed. "Seal the lower bulkheads, contain it." The Magos interfaced with the control runes, mechanical limbs clicking and hissing. Attempting manual override, but the ship is resisting. It doesn't want to be contained. The heartbeat quickened. Callio's could feel it now, beneath his ribs matching his own. He turned toward the viewport. Space itself seemed to shimmer. The stars were wrong, every constellation stretched, distorted. Slowly, impossibly, they were moving. Then came the whisper, not over the Vox, not in the room, inside his mind. "Captain Callio's." He froze. "You broke the silence, you made us real." He spun, pistol raised. "Show yourself." The air shimmered. Shadows rippled against the far bulkhead, forming a silhouette, human-shaped but indistinct. Its edges wavered like heat haze. "We were nothing before you," the voice continued. "Now we are remembered, you gave us form." The captain's hand trembled on the trigger. "You're part of the warp, you shouldn't exist here." "Should," the shadow tilted its head. "You carried us out with you, Callio's, you invited us." The tech priest made a strangled sound. The Gellar field collapse. It may have allowed psychic matter to imprint within the ship's structure. The silence, it's a living resonance. Callio's fired. The shadow burst apart, not into blood but into sound. The shot echoed too long, warping and doubling back on itself until it became a shriek of feedback. The lights exploded. When they came back on, the shadow was gone. But now every surface, every wall, every console, even the deck beneath their boots, was covered in faint rippling patterns, like the surface of disturbed water. The ship itself was breathing. "Captain," came a voice over the Vox, faint, trembling. "This is Lieutenant Mara on Deck 7. We've found something in the maintenance crawlspace." "What is it?" Callios demanded. It's us, sir. The same faces, the same uniforms. They're walking the corridors, but they don't speak. They don't blink." The line went dead. Callios's throat tightened. He looked at the Magos. "Can you cut power to that deck?" "I can try, but if the silence spreads through the data spirits, power loss could." A low groan filled the ship. The hull twisted like something enormous was pressing against it from the outside. Then came the voices again, not whispers this time, but a choir. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of voices all murmuring in perfect harmony. The same words repeated endlessly. "Join the quiet, join the quiet, join the quiet." Crew members began to convulse, clutching their heads. Some tore out their earpieces, others fired their weapons into the air, trying to drown out the sound. Virene suddenly gasped awake, her eyes wide. "Don't listen," she screamed. "It's trying to overwrite you." Callios pulled her close. "What is it? What's happening?" She stared past him toward the walls. "It's using us as a medium. Every thought, every memory, it's building itself from what we are. The silence isn't absence anymore. It's becoming identity." The Magos twitched, his mechanical limbs locking. "Captain, my systems are speaking to me." "Purge them," Callios ordered. "I cannot. They are confessing." The tech priest's head jerked violently, gears screeching. "They say they have seen God." "Enough," Callios bellowed. He drew his blade, cutting through the Magos' data cables. Sparks flared and the body slumped. But in the moment the body fell, it laughed. Not the Magos' voice, but the silence itself, speaking through him. "Do you know what you've done, Captain?" it said. "You fled the sea and brought the tide with you." The lights dimmed again. The ship's chronometers began to tick backward. Time itself seemed to stutter. The stars outside shifted, flickering in and out of existence. Virene stood, staggering toward the viewport. It's not space anymore, it's reflection. The silence has wrapped the materium inside itself. The captain looked out. She was right. The stars weren't stars, they were eyes, each one opening, watching. The silence was not outside the ship anymore. It had swallowed reality whole. He turned back to Virene. "Is there any way out?" She shook her head. "Not unless we can remind it what true silence is." "How?" Her gaze hardened. Someone has to go where it can't follow, inside the ship's mind, inside the silence itself. Before he could answer, the deck beneath them split open. A blinding white light poured out, and a sound like every heartbeat in creation thundered through the air. The Trisagian screamed. Metal twisted. Bulkheads collapsed. Crew were thrown across the chamber as the ship's own machine spirit began to awaken fully, or rather, it awoke through it. Callios dragged Virene to her feet. "If you can reach the core, do it now, whatever it takes." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "If I don't come back." "You will," he said, though he didn't believe it. She turned and ran, disappearing into the smoke-filled corridors. The captain faced the viewport again. The eyes in the void blinked once in unison. Then the voice came, softer than before. "You will understand soon, Captain. Silence is not your enemy. It is your inheritance." He raised his weapon. "Not yet." The hum rose into a roar. The ship's core flared. Virene's psychic presence brushed his mind one last time. "I've reached it," she whispered. "I can hear the silence's true voice." Then everything went white. For a moment, a single fragile moment, there was peace. No heartbeat, no voices, no fear. Just stillness. Then the whisper returned. "You can't destroy silence, Captain. You can only become it." There is no sound in death. Not really, just the absence of it. The mind, stripped of flesh and function, struggles to fill the void. It fabricates heartbeat, breath, echo. It clings to what it remembers. But here, in this place, even memory was forbidden. Captain Kalios opened his eyes to nothing. No light, no dark. Only the feeling of awareness suspended in an endless, formless space. His body wasn't there. His armor, his weapon, his ship, all gone. Yet he could feel the pulse of something vast beneath him, or within him. The silence had formed now. He remembered the last thing he saw, the ship's heart splitting open in a blinding storm of light, Virene screaming into the machine's mind, the warp pressing down on them like an ocean about to crush its last air bubble. Then nothing. Now there was this. Kalios. The voice wasn't sound. It was presence. It appeared as an impression behind thought, a weight pressing from all directions. "Where am I?" he asked. His own voice surprised him. It rippled outward, not as vibration, but as intent. "In the threshold," the voice replied, "between what was and what remembers being." He turned, or the closest thing to turning he could achieve in this state. A shape began to emerge from the blankness. Not a body, but an outline. Familiar. Virene. The astropath's form shimmered, her features blurred like she was half-dreamed. "I found the silence," she whispered. "I went too deep." "What is this place?" "It's where the warp goes when it grows tired of screaming." Her tone broke. "It's everything that's ever fallen silent." Kalios took a step, or tried to. The space beneath him rippled like liquid thought. The ship, the crew. "They're still inside it," she said. "The Trisagion didn't die, it transformed. The silence is using it as a vessel now, a voice." Her eyes flickered open, filled with starlight. "It's learning how to speak through matter." A chill that wasn't physical passed through him, and us. We are what it's studying. The blankness shifted. Patterns began to ripple across the horizon, if it could be called that. Shapes like fractal wings, lines of light forming impossible geometries. They pulsed rhythmically like breath. Then a third voice entered their minds. It wasn't words, it was memory. Images flooded Kalios's consciousness, ancient stars forming, collapsing, dying, the first thoughts of mortal minds, the first fear. And with that fear, the birth of the warp. The silence showed him visions. He saw the Imperium before it was chaos, a calm sea of raw potential, unshaped, untouched. Then the first living creatures dreamed, and those dreams rippled across the veil, infecting it with emotion. Love, hatred, ambition, noise that shattered serenity. "We remember peace," the silence said. Its tone was neither cruel nor kind. It was absolute. "We remember before you." Kalios staggered. "You're saying we corrupted you?" "You defined us," the voice replied. "We were infinite calm. Then came humanity, a symphony of thought. We did not know what sound was until you began to scream." Virene clutched her head. "Captain, it's not a demon, it's not even alive. It's concept. Silence given hunger." "Why us?" Kalios demanded. "Why our ship? Why now?" "Because you listened." The light flared. Kalios found himself standing, this time truly standing, on the deck of the Trisagion. But it wasn't the ship he remembered. The walls were translucent, veins of light running through them. The air shimmered like glass dust. Every surface hummed softly, like a heartbeat turned to crystal. The crew were here too, or what was left of them. Dozens stood motionless across the deck, eyes vacant, faces serene. Not corpses, not living either. Their flesh glowed faintly from within, like wax figures with dying embers trapped inside. Virene appeared beside him, her form flickering in and out. "It's binding them to itself, using them to hold its shape." "Can we stop it?" Her gaze drifted toward the bridge. "Maybe, if we reach the heart again." The heart, the Gellar field chamber. Kalios took a step forward, and the walls pulsed in response, the hum deepening. The ship was aware of him. As they moved through the corridors, they passed echoes of fragments of what the ship remembered. Crew performing their duties, frozen in endless loops. A servitor polishing a wall that no longer existed. Two armsmen playing cards, their hands never finishing the motion. "It's rebuilding memory from scraps," Virene murmured, trying to remember what sound was. Kalios clenched his jaw. "We can give it sound, one last time." They reached the chamber. The heart of the Trisagion was unrecognizable. Where once there had been machinery, now there was a vast, spherical construct of living metal. It pulsed with light in slow, measured intervals. Within it, suspended like an insect in amber, was the body of the Magos. His limbs were stretched and fused with cables that extended into the walls. His mouth moved silently, repeating the same phrase. "I serve the quiet, I serve the quiet, I serve the quiet." Kalios raised his weapon, but Virene stopped him. "Wait." She stepped closer, her eyes half glazed. "He's still connected to the machine spirit. It's through him that the silence speaks." She turned back to Kalios. "If we sever the link, the spirit might remember itself. It might remember the noise of life." The captain hesitated. "And if it does? Then we all become part of it." The hum deepened again, shaking the deck. The air grew heavy, dense with psychic weight. And then a sound. Faint at first. A whisper that was not the silence's voice, but something beneath it. "Captain." Kalios froze. "Who said that?" Another whisper, closer. "Help me." It came from the Magos' body, but it wasn't him. The voice was human, familiar. "Mara," Kalios breathed, the lieutenant who had vanished on Deck 7. Her voice trembled through the air. "We're still here, sir. Inside it. It's holding us together. Don't let it end like this." Virene pressed her hand to the sphere. "There are hundreds of minds trapped in its pattern. We can't destroy it without destroying them too." The captain stepped forward, touching the cold surface. The sphere pulsed once beneath his palm. For a moment, he felt them, all of them, the entire crew screaming silently inside that glow. He drew his blade. "Then we set them free." The silence reacted instantly. The hum turned into a roar. The deck splintered as waves of psychic pressure tore through the room. The air shimmered, bending light like liquid glass. Virene screamed as the pressure forced her to her knees. "Kalios, if you destroy the core, it will collapse into the warp again. You'll open a rift." He didn't hesitate. Better the warp than this. He plunged the blade into the heart. The sphere exploded in a blinding burst of white fire. Every trapped voice screamed, not in pain but in release. The silence howled. The perfect calm shattered into 1,000 echoes. The world fractured, collapsing in on itself. Kalios felt his mind tear in two. Half of him was still aboard the ship, burning. The other half drifted through a sea of broken stars. He saw the warp split apart, its endless scream returning with vengeful clarity. The calm was gone, replaced by raw, chaotic noise. And yet beneath it all, a faint whisper remained. "You cannot kill silence, Kalios. You have only reminded it that it can wake." The world inverted. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on a cold steel floor. The Trisagion was back, its corridors dark, its walls scorched, its systems offline. The hum was gone. Beside him, Virene stirred, groaning weakly. "Did we make it?" He looked around. The ship was still. The stars outside were real again, no shimmer, no distortion. But the silence, it was still there. Not the oppressive kind, not the void that thinks, but true silence, the absence of all things. He exhaled, "Maybe." They rose slowly, moving toward the command deck. Dozens of bodies lay motionless, their faces peaceful, their eyes closed. Virene touched one of them gently. "They're free," she whispered. Kalios nodded, "for now." He reached for the comm panel, but before his fingers touched it, the screen flickered. Static. Then faintly, a single word appeared in pale white text. Listen. The captain froze. Virene, he said quietly. She looked up at him, confused. What? He turned toward the viewport. Outside, far in the distance, one of the stars blinked. Once, twice. Then another. And another. Each blink perfectly timed, rhythmic, deliberate, like a heartbeat. The silence had not died. It had learned. It was calling back. The captain's lips parted, but no sound came. The words caught in his throat, crushed beneath the weight of realization. Virene saw it too, the pattern forming across the stars. Lines of light linking together, shaping a vast, circular glyph that spread across the void. The universe itself was whispering now. Kalios whispered the last words anyone aboard the Trisagion would ever speak. It's everywhere. The stars pulsed once more, and then the silence finally spoke. No scream, no roar. Only a whisper so vast it shook the soul of every living thing within 1,000 light years. Do you hear it now? The message repeated, softer, fading into eternity. The Trisagion drifted on silent, derelict, its signal lost among the stars. But sometimes, on the far edge of Imperial sensor arrays, faint transmissions can still be heard. Not words, not screams. Just a heartbeat,